March 1941, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. The welding torch flickered in the dim light of the submarine construction bay as Edward Nelson, an $11-a-day welder, scrawled his frustration in a worn notebook. "There has to be a better way. This is madness. The Navy supervisors keep telling me to work faster, but they refuse to listen to my solution." Through the maze of scaffolding, beneath the wooden deck of a submarine under construction, he had just witnessed something that made his blood boil. A dozen workers spent an entire shift just to install a single section of deck planking. Enormous scaffolding structures filled the interior compartments below each wooden deck. Men with wrenches working in cramped spaces, twisting nuts onto bolts that penetrated from above. Hours upon hours of labor just to secure wooden planks to steel framework. The traditional method demanded precision, patience, and precious time. Time that America did not have as war clouds gathered over the Pacific. Yet here, in what would soon become one of the busiest shipyards in the world, attachment methods were the same as they had been for decades. Theodore Edward Nelson, 36 years old, California-born, had earned his mechanical knowledge the hard way. 15 years in machine shops across California. 15 years of learning how metal behaved, how electricity flowed, how problems could be solved if only someone would listen. What none of the Navy supervisors knew was that this frustrated welder had already solved their problem. And what Nelson did not yet know was that his simple solution, rejected and dismissed by his superiors, would soon save the United States Navy more than 50 million man-hours and fundamentally change naval construction forever. The transformation had begun weeks earlier in the cramped interior spaces below decks, where the real war against inefficiency was being fought every single day. The date was March 15, 1941. 8 months and 22 days before Pearl Harbor. Mare Island Naval Shipyard stretched across 635 acres along the Napa River in Vallejo, California, 25 miles northeast of San Francisco. Founded in 1854 by Commander David Glasgow Farragut, it was the first United States Navy base established on the Pacific Ocean. By early 1941, Mare Island had evolved into the premier West Coast submarine construction facility. The yard operated around the clock, 3 shifts of workers, 7 days a week. Submarine construction had accelerated dramatically as tensions mounted with Japan. The yard employed approximately 12,000 civilian workers in early 1941, a number that would eventually swell to nearly 50,000 by 1944. Among those 12,000 workers was Ted Nelson, employee number 3872. He earned $11 per day, working the day shift from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. His job was welding, primarily on submarine hulls and internal structures. He was good at his work, fast and precise, but increasingly frustrated by what he saw as wasteful inefficiency. The problem was everywhere he looked. Wooden deck planking installation on submarines, destroyers, and aircraft carriers. The Navy specified wooden decks for several reasons. Wood provided better traction than steel in wet conditions. Wood was quieter for crew movement. Wood provided some insulation against the cold steel beneath, and in the event of fire, wooden decks could be more easily repaired or replaced than welded steel plates. But the installation method was archaic, labor-intensive, and painfully slow. The standard procedure, unchanged since the First World War, proceeded in a series of complicated steps. First, workers would drill holes through the wooden planks at precisely measured intervals. These holes would be countersunk to allow the heads of the attachment bolts to sit flush with the deck surface. Next, workers would position the planks on the steel deck framework. Then came the nightmare. Workers had to construct extensive scaffolding beneath the deck inside the submarine or ship compartments. Multiple levels of platforms were required to give workers access to the underside of the steel deck framework. Once the scaffolding was in place, workers above and below would coordinate to insert long, threaded bolts down through the wooden planks and through corresponding holes in the steel framework. Workers below, standing on scaffolding platforms in cramped dark spaces, would thread nuts onto the protruding bolt ends. They would tighten these nuts with wrenches, pulling the wooden planks firmly against the steel framework above. Finally, Workers topside would fill the counter holes with wooden plugs, creating a smooth deck surface. The entire process was repeated for every section of decking. On a submarine, there might be several hundred square feet of wooden decking requiring thousands of individual attachment points. On an aircraft carrier, the aircraft flight deck covered tens of thousands of square feet. The labor requirements were staggering. A typical submarine deck installation required a crew of 12 to 16 men working for 5 to 7 days. The scaffolding alone took 2 full days to construct and another day to dismantle. The actual bolt installation consumed the remaining time. Ted Nelson had performed this work dozens of times. He had spent countless hours standing on scaffolding platforms, threading nuts onto bolts in cramped submarine compartments barely 4 feet high. His back ached from the constant bending. His knuckles were scarred from slipped wrenches. His patience was exhausted. But more than personal discomfort drove his frustration. He could see the bigger picture. War was coming. Everyone at Mare Island knew it. The yard was already behind schedule on submarine and destroyer construction. The Navy needed boats in the water, not sitting in dry dock waiting for deck installation. Every day of delay was a day closer to a conflict. America was not ready to fight, and Nelson knew there was a better way. He had been thinking about the problem for months, turning it over in his mind during the long hours of routine welding work.